I want to harp on this point right here because this is really the crux of what is going on right now in Sudan. It says the U.S. government and ruling class do not want a revolutionary democratic government in the Republic of Sudan, since the impact of such a phenomenon would have residual effects throughout the North and Horn of Africa region. To the north of Sudan, it is quite discernible in relations to Egypt that the imperialists do not want an end to the status quo where the military forces are subsidized by the US in exchange for elusive commitments of financial support through loans and trade deals. Under the guise of protecting US nationals and maintaining the security presence against terrorist attacks, the AFRICOM forces are enhancing their deployment into the Red Sea area. Anti-war activists in the West should be as concerned as the neighboring states, such as South Sudan, about foreign military interventions. It's as bad as Palestine right now. I'm no lie. So let's get to it. Another catastrophe is happening in Sudan right now, as a lot of people are basically mentally involved and emotionally involved in what's going on in Palestine. There is a lot that's going on in Sudan. So I'm going to share this video with you right now so that you guys are aware. It's pretty bad. So I'm going to share this video. We're going to start off and then we'll get into a little bit more. I actually talked about Sudan a few months ago on this channel and really talked about how it's kind of a proxy war going on there, but it's gotten worse. So this was shared by Professor George Lee, Consciously, on Twitter. So let's go.
The people of Sudan deserve our attention and to be remembered. Today marks 192 days since Sudan has been in war. Not all my content makes it through on TikTok, so hopefully this one will. There isn't a lot of coverage on Sudan, unfortunately, as per usual when it comes to African countries. Thousands of people have died. The last number I read was 9,000 people, and millions, 5.6, almost 6 million people have been displaced, forced.
Let's go back to what she just said.
5.6.
So
African countries. Thousands of people have died. The last number I read was 9,000 people, and millions, 5.6, almost 6 million people have been displaced.
So over 9,000 have died. So far, as from the last number I've heard in Palestine, was 7,000 Palestinians that were murdered by the state of Israel. As far as in Sudan, 9,000. Over 2.2 million Palestinians have been displaced in Palestine. Over 5 million Sudanese people have been displaced in Sudan. It's bad. It's bad. Let's continue.
Forced to move out of their homes. Resistance has been difficult due to daily bombings and a lot of the militia having taken over people's houses. But there is still some forms of resistance. The people of Sudan have created emergency response rooms, women's response rooms to meet people's needs, women's needs. There's been a lot of sexual violence, rape. The hospitals have been either bombed, shut down, and if open, they're only partially functioning. There's shortage of medicine, vital supplies. resources. The little coverage that's getting, it's mostly for the capital, for Khartoum, but other regions are also experiencing a lot of violence and killings. Darfur, which many of you will remember from 2003, when hundreds of thousands of people were killed and millions of people displaced. A lot of the violence is happening right now. It actually never really stopped. The conflict is also going on there and other regions of Sudan. I don't know anybody currently who lives in Sudan, as opposed to, for example, in Palestine. I have people in the West Bank. I talk to them every day, so it's easier to keep up with the news. But also in my mind, but I do have Sudanese people in my community. And I was speaking to a friend of mine and I asked her what we can do, what I can do. And she said to share what's happening there. And hopefully this would make it on TikTok and you guys can see it. I know there isn't a lot of coverage. I personally don't do any of this or talk about it or do protests or boycott because I think it's going to make a lot of difference, as I've been engaged in some of this work for a long time. But I do believe it makes us feel less helpless. I don't know. All I know is that the people of Sudan deserve our attention and to be remembered. They are going through hell.
So that's what's going on in Sudan right now. There's more I'm going to be sharing. This is going to be a piece that I'm going to be also sharing here as well, so that people are aware. And so this is going to be a reminder of what we were talking about, and I'll go into what I was referring to as well a little bit more in a second. We're going to be going back into one of my videos, actually, so I'll be sharing that in a second.
What's happening in Sudan? If you've been following the news, you might have seen the reports of fighting throughout Sudan, which some are warning could be the beginning of a new civil war. And to understand what's going on, we need to go back a couple of years. You see, in 2019, Sudan's dictatorship was overthrown in a revolution, with promises that democracy would be soon on the way. However, in 2021, the Sudanese military and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces took power over the country in a coup. Since then, the military and RSF have been squabbling over the power that should be shared, and these tensions have finally come to a head. The RSF, who have ties to the UAE and Russia, launched attacks across Sudan, including in the capital Khartoum. Since then, fighting has continued across the country, and foreign nationals are being evacuated from Sudan en masse. And with no sign of an end to hostilities, it looks like once again it'll be the Sudanese people who suffer in this fight between two power-hungry armed groups. What's happening?
So that is a bit of what is going on right now. So there's really just two different groups. The Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces are actually warring against each other. They actually worked together before in a coup. And so now there is really just a butting heads of what's going on right now in Sudan, because one group wants to be at the top when it comes to civilian political power, and the other side says, no, we should be at the top of civilian political power. And so now the tensions have grown to a military escalation, and the people who are caught in the middle and being killed in the middle are the Sudanese people. So this is what's going on. And I actually talked about this backstory way back a few months ago in regards to what was happening in Sudan. So I hope, yeah. So here I am going back to talk about what's going on in Sudan. Hopefully you guys won't get double vision, because yes, it is two of me, but yeah. So let's go. Are also part of the Black Agenda Report. They also do write articles, things like that. This is an article by Dr. Abdulwahab Sheikh. Armed forces good for democratic transition. And so these two gentlemen here, these two people are basically fighting one another. This is one of the reasons why I said in the thumbnail is a tug of war for Sudan. And what does this tug of war mean? It says the battle between warring generals in Sudan must end with a return to civilian rule. It says in Sudan, two rivalry security forces turned their guns on each other on April 15th after many months of tension between the two groups. On that date, Sudanese citizens were awakened by gunfire and explosions in the capital of Khartoum. These Sudanese armed forces were engaged in fierce battle with paramilitary known as Rapid Support Force and control of the military facilities, airport and streets in Khartoum. At the center of the conflict are Army Chief Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. Sudan's political and security crisis began in April 2019 following months of protests against the country's long-serving dictator, President Omar al-Bashir, and the military seizing control of the country's affairs. Even after Bashir was gone, Sudanese civilians continued with their demonstrations demanding elections to be held and power returned to the civilian government. 4 months later, the military ceded power and agreed to power sharing agreement with civilians, leading the country to an election by the end of 2023. The military, led by Army Chief Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, dissolved the government led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, replacing the power sharing agreement. In November 2021, al-Burhan was sworn in as head of the new Sovereign Council and was sworn in November 21st, and Hemedti was his deputy. So, why is this going on? And this actually gets into it here. So it says the current disagreement between Sudanese armed forces led by Burhan and the paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Force, led by Hemedti, stems from how to conduct the transition from a military rule to a civilian government, and also how the RSF can be incorporated into the army and the authority that should oversee the process. So basically what's going on now is that there is now, because of this disagreement, it has led to a warring of two sides. You have the paramilitary side, which is the RSF, and then you have the SAF, which is the government military, right, of Sudan. And so now they're going after each other because one side is basically saying they have a disagreement of how to implement this government, and they feel that their guy at the top should be the head of the government versus the actual military, the guy at the top, they want to have over their government. So ultimately, that's basically what it is. And so there's this disagreement that has come about between Burhan and Hemedti. And so who's caught in the middle? Really, it is the Sudanese people. And so the entire country, from Khartoum all the way, westward to Darfur, is embroiled in this extremely catastrophic conflict between both. So that's a bit of a backstory. So did I put the link in the chat? Yeah, I put the link in the chat so you guys can see what the origin is of what's going on. And now we're going to see what happened just a few months ago after that report, what has transpired later. So going back to Black Agenda Report, it says Sudan conflict provides rationale for further imperialist militarization. Now, the blurb says the United States deploys naval warships and drones after creating the conditions for destabilization in Sudan. AFRICOM's presence is expanding under the guise of protecting U.S. nationals. So, it says since April 15, hundreds of thousands of people have been dislocated in the Republic of Sudan, a strategically important state and a member of the African Union. The two military structures have dominated the body politic for many years, have now turned against each other, leaving the country in an unprecedented social crisis. So this is Vernon and Hemedi. Reports from inside Sudan indicate that over 500 people, this is at the time, have been killed in the fighting between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. Thousands of others have been wounded, seriously injured, and traumatized as their homes have been damaged, along with the loss of jobs, the diminishing healthcare services, and the disruption of communities within Khartoum, Omdurman, and other areas throughout the vast country. Such a chaotic situation can only benefit the imperialist states, which have sought to dominate Sudan and the African continent for centuries. The United States has imposed harsh sanctions on the Republic of Sudan for decades, accusing the former government of President Omar Hassan al-Bashir of being a sponsor of state terrorism. Successive administrations in Washington encouraged the rebellion in the south of the country, which resulted with the partitioning and subsequent weakening economically and politically of the newly formed Republic of South Sudan, as well as Khartoum in the north. Since the split of the Republic of Sudan, the economic crisis in both states have worsened precipitously. So I want to get to what this is actually resulting in. It says White House orders warship and drones to the Red Sea. The Biden administration has provided confusing and contradictory message in regards to the situation in Sudan. Initially, there was an evacuation of U.S. diplomatic personnel from the capital of Khartoum during the first few days of the clashes between the SAF and RSF. The State Department said it had no plans for evacuation of the 16,000 people holding U.S. passports in Sudan. Administration officials noted that they have warned U.S. citizens to leave the country as early as the middle of 2021. Nevertheless, since the withdrawal of the diplomatic staff, there has been a military buildup in the Port Sudan area in the east of the country. The U.S., Britain, France, and other states are participating in the evacuation of the citizens from Sudan. So, according to one source from the U.S. military forces in the Red Sea, the Pentagon has assisted in evacuation by deploying intelligence and surveillance support, and we are moving naval assets within the region to provide any necessary support along the coast. According to a statement on Saturday, that was April 29th, from Deputy Pentagon Secretary Sabrina Singh, a U.S. official told NPR American ships are just off Port Sudan, but not in the port itself. The official said that there is no State Department or U.S. military personnel at the port. So it says from the Military Times, it expands the extent of Pentagon presence by the U.S. AFRICOM and the Red Sea. Obviously, the escalating tensions in Sudan will influence the talking points of the Biden administration in regard to deepening militarization of the Red Sea and the Horn of African regions in the continent. So this, you guys already know what this is about. This is not any surprise. Ultimately, this is about resources that's going on right now. And this is ultimately what the interest is, U.S. interests and all that. I want to harp on this point right here because this is really the crux of what is going on right now in Sudan. It says the U.S. government and ruling class do not want a revolutionary democratic government in the Republic of Sudan, since the impact of such a phenomenon would have residual effects throughout the North and Horn of Africa region. To the north of Sudan, it is quite discernible in relations to Egypt that the imperialists do not want an end to the status quo where the military forces are subsidized by the U.S. in exchange for elusive commitments of financial support through through loans and trade deals. Under the guise of protecting U.S. nationals and maintaining the security presence against terrorist attacks, the African forces are enhancing their deployment into the Red Sea area. Anti-war activists in the West should be as concerned as the neighboring states, such as South Sudan, about foreign military interventions. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir has offered to host a meeting between the two belligerent military structures in order to work out a permanent ceasefire. Kiir has warned that any outside military intervention will only aggravate existing internal problems. Until African states and regional organizations such as the African Union, the Internal Governmental Authority on Development, and East African Community insist on the non-interference of the internal affairs of Sudan and any other African state, imperialism will continue to strive or control developments among the 1.3 million people on the continent. So this is really about control within the region of the Horn of Africa. So let's take a look at this map just so that people are aware of the logistics, basically, of what's going on within Africa. So, all right, so here's Sudan right here, right? Sudan is pretty big. Like, Africa is a massive nation, right? And so Sudan is huge. And so you have Sudan, South Sudan, but right here, right in between the Indian Ocean and you have the Red Sea, right? So you have Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya. Below South Sudan is Uganda. So this is strategic, right? To the northeast, I think that's Saudi Arabia. And so then you have Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So this area is extremely strategic. And the reason why it's so strategic is because you have a lot of natural resources within this area that especially Western nations want to control. So you have a lot of natural resources in Ethiopia, Somalia, and you also have them in Sudan. Right next to Sudan, you have neighboring Chad. Then you have Central African Republic. And then you also have Libya to the northwest. So this is a very strategic part. Also, you have the Nile River going through Sudan as well. So you have this strategic point where a lot of people, a lot of people want to have this area in their possession or in their control. So that's why it's so important as well to have Sudan within basically the clutches of an imperialist power like the United States, like the UK, and others. So here is a summary of what's going on within Sudan so that you guys are aware. And this will give you a more of a breakdown, kind of a crash course, so you guys are aware of what's going on. So let me just go.
Since this post went viral, many of you have asked what is actually going on in Sudan. The headline is, on one side, you have the people of Sudan who want freedom, and on the other, you have military generals. Generals who are only interested in power, but the international community supported them. It's a 1-minute rundown on how we got here. In 2019, the Sudanese people overthrew the dictator, Omar al-Bashir, that had been in power for like 30 years. What came next was a transitional council, which was part civilian, part military. And the point was it was a transition to a civilian-led government, or a civilian government, which is what the people wanted. 2 years in, at the point when the military was meant to hand over to the civilians, the military overthrew the transitional council, which is essentially a coup. That was October 2021. At this point, the international community made a choice. They made a choice to deal with the military generals, Hemeti and Burhan, rather than listen to the civilians who were like, don't trust these guys, they're genocidal, don't do it. Hemeti and Burhan were working together against the Sudanese people. But once it came to them two being in power, they started fighting each other for the ultimate seat at the top. And that's what happened on April the 15th, 2023. They decided to start fighting each other, and the Sudanese people were caught in the middle. Tens of thousands have been killed and over 4 million have been displaced. People are calling it a genocide.
So this is what's happening right now. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important. Because ultimately, there are people that are suffering in the middle of all this. So this is eyesonsudan.net. Says on the 15th of April, fighting broke out in Khartoum between Sudanese armed forces and a powerful paramilitary faction, the Rapid Support Forces. Clashes spread across the nation in Sudan, and the civilian populace is caught in the middle. So says if you're in Egypt, you could support here. Template to write your elected representatives. Says organize a fundraiser or solidarity protest for our toolkit. So these are some things you can do to support the Sudanese people. So they're also having protests, local protests, to support peace in Sudan. So this is actually really important for people to, It says donate to the Sudanese American Physicians Association, supporting people on the ground. So it says, what are the people on the ground asking for? Civilian resistance to the military coup is led by numerous committees throughout the country. The objectives of current resistance agreed to ahead of the demonstrations on the 30th of October, which is 2021. Overthrow the military coup and handing power back to civilians, sending members of the military council to trial immediately for instigating the coup, no dialogue and no negotiation with members of the military council or its security committees, rejection of interference by foreign actors like the United States. Dissolve all armed militia and reconfigure the national armed forces to a body aimed at protecting the country's borders and the people's right to freedom, peace, and justice. Remove all armed forces from the political process and criminalize the practice of politics by the military. Form structures of the transitional authority under the supervision of relevant professional and academic bodies. Complete independence of the sovereignty of the Sudanese state in matters of economics, politics, and national security. So as far as what's going on is Katie Lewis, Cam, good to see you, says, what's the military coup backed by the West? Well, that's a good question. And it is obviously backed by the West. The United States, is wanting to keep it going on both sides, because ultimately, when you keep a country destabilized, then it is easier to extract resources from said country.